take off, take flight with you. For we never fly, but we're flying.
Hi folks, welcome back to another episode of Take Flight Podcast. This is episode number 233, and this is part of our takeaway solo episodes, where one of the hosts of Take Flight Podcast walks you through a topic that they're interested in and they feel like the listeners can truly gain value from. This week's episode will be hosted by myself, OLU OKUNOLA. On this week's episode, I want to look back on my 20s, talk about my regrets, my lessons learned, which has allowed me to become financially stable in my 30s. Now, what I mean about financially stable is I don't worry about money, right? I don't live paycheck to paycheck. I've been able to build a certain amount of wealth, which in the next few years will compound, which will put me in a comfortable position when I retire. Now, there was a lot of things I did well, but there was also a lot of things that I wish when I was in my 20s, I had a podcast that I could listen to and learn from some of the mistakes that that person had made. So before we get started, just a disclaimer. This podcast is for information purposes only. Matters discussed are not intended to provide and should not be relied on as investment, accounting, legal, tax advice, or recommendations. The views and opinions presented are those of the host of the podcast. We advise for you to seek and obtain independent professional advice in relations to your personal circumstances. So let's get started. Now, a really great quote that I like is, "A wise man learns from his mistakes, but a wiser man learns from others' mistakes." So the point of this episode is I'm going to go through 10 lessons learned or advice that I wish I had when I was 20, where any of our listeners who are in the late teens, early 20s should listen to, should probably implement, or should actually question if that's something they should consider and think about. So the first advice is educating yourself on personal finance and development. Now, we've all gone through, or a lot of people listening have gone through the schooling system, and the schooling system is not designed for financial development, personal finance. You rarely talk about mortgages, investing, saving in school. But now that we are in the generation where we have so much technology, so much access to the YouTube, TikTok, all these different platforms where you can absorb and learn a lot of information when it comes to personal finance. There's this podcast, for example. So if you are listening to this episode, you're already taking the first step in the right direction. But my first advice, and one of the things that I was lucky to be able to do in my 20s, was educate myself on personal finance. I have a brother, older brother, who works in the finance industry. So I asked him a lot of questions about investing, pensions, saving, research, read a lot of books. One of the first books that I read around sort of personal development also, or personal finance, was Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? That got me thinking about assets, liabilities. So that's the first thing. Really educate yourself on personal finance and development. Second advice is start investing early and start to build a saving mindset. Another advice that I received really young was to maximize my savings from a young age. So my first job, I was talking to my brother and I was considering if I should maximize my pension contribution. The way it works in the UK is you'll contribute a certain percentage, let's say 5%, and your employer will match that 5%. And when I first started, I was pondering, is this a good idea? Is this something I should do? And my brother said, hell yes, it's free money. Also, which is very important, is if you've never received that money, you're not missing out on anything. Because that was my first job, my first income coming in, me contributing that maximum amount to pension, I never received that money. That was never my money. That was money allocated to my future. And from every promotion, every new job I've got or had since then, I've contributed the maximum to my pension. I've contributed the maximum to saving, investing, and thinking about the future. The reason why that's a lot easier is because it's harder to receive money, start to build a certain lifestyle, and then cut that back to start saving. If you've never received that money, it's so much easier mentally to say, that's never, I used to earn, let's assume, 2K a month. But if I've always contributed £500 to investing and saving, in my mind, I've only received 1,500. That's the lifestyle I'm going to build. Now, if I get promotion and again, I allocate more to savings, even if I increase my spending money from 1,500 to let's say 1,700, that's great because I've made more money. I'm making more money myself. But that additional amount that I've allocated to investing, I've never felt that money. It doesn't feel like I've lost that money. I've never built a lifestyle to depend on that money. So when you're young, especially in your 20s, even if you're earning only a small salary, start to build that mindset of saving, investing, maximizing your pension. This will allow compounding because people don't realize how important compounding. The earlier you start investing, even if it's as small as £100 a month, the more you can amount in the future. And as you start to earn more money, you can start to allocate more and more to investing. Now, normally what I say is start budgeting because especially when you're in your 20s, you think, I don't have that money disposable. Yes, you do. So most of the time, you're probably living at home with family members. Those are the times you don't have as much responsibilities that you can allocate more to investing and saving. The next thing is don't take out massive debt for a degree or a bachelor's degree or undergrad or postgrad degree. Now, it's kind of different in the UK. I think in America, they spend a massive amount on degrees. But I always say, look, there's so many cheaper ways to get educated, right? Do you need to go to the top school? Is there any scholarships, any grants for you to get a particular qualification? I try to avoid, or I would advise someone to avoid, and I think that's one of the good things I have is I avoided taking out lots of loan or debt to be able to study or get a degree. Because what ends up happening is I know people who did one degree, didn't finish it, took out another loan to do another degree, finished it, in a few years changed their mind and said, oh, I want to do another degree. And now they've got 100K worth of debt, which is just amounting and gaining interest on that. It's not worth it. There's so many apprenticeships, there's so many sponsorships, grants that you can take out to get educated. So I would say if you are looking to get degree education, look at what scholarships, grants are out there and try not to amount a lot of loans and debt to be able to afford it. If it means staying at home so that you reduce that cost, why not? The next thing is, look, me personally, I've been able to amount assets and wealth by focusing on looking for a career that has a high income and also large amount of opportunities. So I work in finance. I selected finance one because I'm good at numbers, right? But also I worked backwards. I said my end goal in a few years or in 10, 20 years will be to be a finance director, CFO, etc. What is the salary of that particular job? What are the opportunities? Every company, organization needs someone in finance. So I started applying my degrees, my education along the lines of somewhere that I knew that there was a massive amount of career opportunity at the end. And I think sometimes people don't focus on the end salary, end goal, end opportunity, and they just select a degree or qualification or career path that, yes, you might be interested in it, and yet at that particular age at 18, 19, 20, but in regards to the long-term revenue that you can generate for that or long-term job opportunity or job advancements or career advancements, it's not really there. And they find themselves being disappointed and taking different routes. Going on to number 5, take more risk. Now, this is one area that I wish I did, especially with my career, is I wish I moved into different industries, different companies sooner, right? Especially in your 20s, the most important thing is find great leaders, develop as much skills as possible, and fail often, right? I think there's some elements of it that I did play it safe, that I wish in my 20s I said, hey, I want to move to a tech startup, work there for a few years, then said, okay, you know what, I want to work in this other industry, work there within finance. But that's one of the areas I wish I had probably done more of. The next number 6 is try to buy a house as soon as possible. One of the areas that's allowed my net worth to grow a tremendous amount is buying a house at the age of 23 or in my early 20s. Right now, the way I was able to do that was aggressively sacrifices and saving in my early years. Now, that property wasn't in London, right? So I said I'm going to buy a house based on what I can afford and where I can afford. And that has compounded tremendously. Like the equity on that property has grown. The value of that property has doubled over 10 years I've had that property. Now, on the other side of this, and this was a lesson learned, is stay away from buying apartments. I am not a fan of buying apartments. I don't believe apartments grow in value. You have so much different expenses, service charge, ground rent, etc. If you want to stay in an apartment, feel free to rent one, right? But I'm not a fan of buying apartments. So that's another advice I'll throw with the buy a house as soon as possible. Number 7, turn your earned income into other streams of income. So as you're in your 20s, you got your 9 to 5, you're making money. You want to try to figure out how you can transfer that money into quote unquote passive income. Now, I don't believe anything is 100% passive, but what this can mean is making salary from your job, purchasing a buy to let property, and making rental income from that. If that's investing in the stock market, if that's starting a business, because one of the things you want to do, especially in your 20s, is you want to try to create multiple streams of income. Now, when I say multiple streams, I'm not talking about side hustles like you hear all the time on YouTube and the internet. I'm more saying, how do you not be so reliant on your 9 to 5? Because if, God forbid, you are made redundant, if you haven't started to create other passive or other income streams like a buy to let, a business, side business that you might be working on, you then will be in a position that you're not having any other income coming in. So whilst in your 20s, look at ways to turn your earned income into other streams of income. Number 8, when it comes to spending, because you are going to spend in your 20s, spend on experiences and not material things. Now, I can't remember one thing or item I purchased in my 20s. I'm like, thank God I purchased that, trainers or shoes or clothes or watch, that I truly value now. But one thing I will always value and remember are my experiences traveling around Thailand, skydiving in Dubai, going to Coachella. Those experiences with friends. If you are going to spend money, and when you do spend money, direct it towards experiences versus material things. The cars, please don't buy a brand new car. You shouldn't be buying a brand new car in your 20s, but you're not going to remember what car you bought in your 20s. You're not even going to have it in your 20s, right? That memory is going to fade. It's not going to be there. But the experiences you're going to remember. Now, number 9, a little bit controversial, but I felt like this was one of the reasons that made me more financially stable when I was in my 30s, is avoid having kids young in your 20s, right? Whilst doing this episode, I did some research to say what is the average cost of having a child, and they came up to around, I think they were saying 12 to 14K per year. Now, from 21, I've got a child, spending 12 to 14K. That would take away from me being able to put into the stock market, me being able to have a deposit to buy a house, to be able to create a more stable environment for when I do decide to have kids. So that's number 9. And my last advice, and number 10, is you are the average of your closest 5 friends. So choose wisely. Now, I've been blessed to have some amazing friends who are on the podcast, some of the close friends that are not on the podcast, but each and every one of them has some sort of quality which I try to emulate in some sense, right? They're either driven, right? So we're competitive in the way that we're always thinking about, okay, what new business ideas can we have? They're family oriented in such a way where I'm like, look, I love the way you are with your family members. I want to emulate that sort of trait. They look after themselves, fitness. They're not focused on toxic drama. So when it comes to your 20s, please, please, please assess the people you spend most of your time around, because you will find that you will start to adapt, inherit the traits that they have. I'm blessed about the people I've met at university. I've mentioned it before, Daniel and Pabilo on the podcast, right? We all went to the same university. We motivated each other. We were so competitive. As okay, who can get the highest grade here? If there's a business idea that I'm thinking about, or Pabilo's thinking about, we'll talk about it with each other. So look, this has been a very long takeaway episode, but I thought it would be good to just take some time to sit down and talk about some of the lessons I learned in my 20s, which has allowed me to be financially stable in my early 30s. So I'm going to quickly run through it 1 to 10. Firstly, educate yourself on personal finance and development. Second, start investing early and build a saving mindset. 3, avoid massive debt for undergrad and postgrad degrees. 4, select a career which has a massive amount of opportunities at the end, and also you can earn a larger amount of income. 5, take risk in your 20s and fail often. 6, buy a house as soon as possible and try to avoid apartments. 7, turn your earned income into other streams of income. 8, when you do spend on experiences and not material things. 9, avoid having kids in your early 20s. And 10, choose your friends wisely. You are the average of your 5 closest friends. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you do have any questions, reach out to us on Take Flight Podcast. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do subscribe, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Take off, take flight with you.